Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Lost in the hyperbolic statements and calls of doom, if Congress does not raise the current debt ceiling, is the real problem that our nation faces, the out-of-control spending that has become epidemic here in Congress. No doubt a technical default in August surely would be problematic, but much worse would be the results if Republicans cave to Democrats and no significant spending reforms is implemented. Today, my colleagues, 68 cents of every dollar is spent on entitlement programs. By the year 2025, the government will spend 100% of every dollar on revenues on entitlements. The United States is over $14 trillion in debt, and without spending cuts in the deficit, and our national debt will continue to grow. We must begin to rein in spending and bring about the fiscal changes to protect our children from this growing burden of debt. Mr. Speaker, importantly, markets understand the difference between a technical default, in which investors may have to wait a short period of time for an interest payment, and the difference with an actual default in which a country is unable to repay its debt. If Congress does not act appropriately now, very soon the country will not face merely a technical default, but instead a real default. Then the calls of doom will be appropriate. Investors have every incentive to want Congress to balance its budget and get its house in order finally. If this means investors will have to wait a few days for an interest payment to be repaid, then so be it. Because fixing the real problem now guarantees to investors that this government can make its payments 10 years from now. A realization that will comfort investors much more than preventing a mild delay, particularly if that mild delay means future delays, future debt limit debates, and future possible defaults. Of course, the best solution, is no default at all, not technical and not actual. Congress must quickly come together and make some tough decisions that will forever affect the future of our country. But we will not be coerced into a position that fuels a spending addiction that has landed us in this situation to where we stand today. We will not succumb to a vote to increase the debt limit if we are not compensated with significant spending cuts. As our Speaker John Boehner has said, quote, "It's true that allowing America to default would be irresponsible, but it would be more irresponsible to raise the debt ceiling without simultaneously taking dramatic steps to reduce spending and reform the budget process itself," end quote. And it can be done. We can look back to understand what will happen next. Several years back, Russia had a real default, yet within 2 or 3 years they reached all-time low interest rates. Earlier this year, the House passed the House Budget Resolution for fiscal year 2012, which set non-security discretionary spending to below 2008 funding levels. It calls upon repealing the costly and burdensome health care law and envisions reforming some entitlement programs to contain costs and pay down the national budget. My colleagues across the aisle have criticized portions of this legislation, but the question is asked, where is their alternative? There can be no debate if the other side cannot produce a logical document that seriously sets out to solve our nation's crisis, the real crisis. Just like the solution to a drug addiction is not to increase one's intake, the solution to our nation's spending addiction is not to increase one's capacity to continue to accumulate debt. The time is now for real reform. Only after we have curbed the trillions of dollars of debt that we continue to pile up can we then consider raising the debt limit.